They were the identical jokesters with country charm, the Hager Twins, John and Jim, who made millions laugh on Hee Haw. With matching smiles and harmonies, they became household names. But behind the synchronized laughs and clean-cut image lived two very different men, each with their own hidden pain. Fame gave them a platform, but it also took its toll. What really happened when the cameras stopped rolling? How did their lives unfold in the shadows of the show that made them stars? And what was never revealed until now? Because the truth about the Hager Twins' final years is something no one saw coming. They weren't born in Nashville. They weren't born in Hollywood. They weren't even born into the same family. But Jim and John Hager, identical twins born in Chicago on August 30th, 1941, were adopted together by a Methodist minister and his wife, who raised them in the heart of the Midwest. Growing up in Park Ridge, Illinois, the twins were inseparable, so close, in fact, that even their teachers had a hard time telling them apart. But it wasn't just their appearance that matched. It was their rhythm, their humor, their uncanny ability to finish each other's sentences, and most of all, their love of music. At just 11 years old, they were singing in church choirs, performing at school functions, and practicing guitar by night. They'd imitate the harmonies of the Everly Brothers and dream about making it to the big stage someday. That dream would eventually carry them all the way to the West Coast, where the twins enrolled at a performing arts college in California. There, they landed small parts in local theater productions and made ends meet with odd jobs. But their breakthrough didn't come from an audition. It came from a chance meeting. One night, while playing at a small club in Los Angeles, the twins caught the attention of Buck Owens's team. Owens, a rising force in country music at the time, saw something in the brothers, a raw, genuine charisma that couldn't be manufactured. He brought them into his orbit, and soon the Hager Twins were working as guitarists and backup vocalists for Buck's shows. They didn't mind being in the background. They were just happy to be in the room. But it wouldn't be long before their presence would steal the spotlight. In 1969, CBS greenlit a new variety show, a quirky, country-themed comedy hour meant to compete with the slick urban appeal of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. That show would become Hee Haw. Owens was cast as a co-host, and when producers were looking to round out the ensemble with fresh-faced country talent, Buck had a suggestion. Get the Hager Twins. It was a move that would launch them into overnight fame. The twins, decked in matching outfits and sporting their signature blonde bangs, quickly became favorites with audiences. They weren't just musicians. They were comedians, actors, and entertainers. Their timing was sharp. Their jokes hit. And most of all, they brought an undeniable chemistry that no duo could replicate. America fell in love. Fan mail poured in by the thousands. Women adored them. Kids mimicked them. They became the heartthrobs of the hay bale. But fame is funny, because while the world saw two smiling, singing brothers on Saturday night TV, very few knew what was really going on behind the curtain. Jim and John were rising fast, but they weren't rising evenly. And as one twin embraced the spotlight, the other began to quietly shrink away. What the public didn't know was that this perfect duo was already starting to drift apart, even at the height of their fame. From the moment they stepped onto the Hee Haw set, Jim and John Hager were naturals. Whether they were delivering punchlines in the cornfield skits or singing heartfelt ballads between the laughs, the twins made everything look effortless. But what viewers saw on screen was only a fraction of the truth. Behind the scenes, the pressure to be the cheerful, squeaky clean duo America loved was taking a toll, especially on Jim. He was the quieter one, more introspective, more sensitive to the demands of stardom. While John seemed to thrive under the spotlight, Jim often withdrew after filming, choosing silence over celebration. The twins had always done everything together, but now their reactions to fame were beginning to diverge. The demands of the show were relentless. Taping schedules ran long. The humor had to be sharp but family-friendly, and the producers didn't want anything too real. The Hagers, who were talented songwriters and guitarists in their own right, were rarely allowed to showcase their own material. Instead, they were boxed into a formula: laugh, sing, repeat. Over time, the twins started pushing back. They wanted more input, more originality, more space to evolve. But the Hee Haw machine didn't bend easily, and the conflict started to wear them down. Off camera, John sought distraction in the nightlife of Nashville and Los Angeles. He became known among insiders as the more outgoing twin, the one who dated starlets, frequented clubs, and chased new experiences. He was charming, quick-witted, and always ready with a joke. Jim, on the other hand, grew more private. He turned inward. Some say he struggled with depression long before it had a name. Others mention quiet battles with prescription medication long before those battles became national headlines. Neither brother ever spoke publicly about these struggles. They were too proud, too loyal to the image, and maybe too scared of what would happen if the truth came out. But those close to them noticed. There were days when Jim would show up to set emotionally checked out, only to snap back into character the moment the cameras rolled. There were rumors of tension, not between the brothers, but within themselves. It wasn't easy being half of an image, and though their act was built on being identical, they were becoming anything but. The public adored their sameness, but offstage, their differences were pulling them into different orbits. And while the world was laughing along with the Hager twins, one of them was slowly, quietly, beginning to fall apart. The distance between the spotlight and the soul was growing wider, and the next chapter would show just how far they would drift. Once the laughter stopped, when Hee Haw officially ended its syndicated run in 1993, it marked the end of an era, not just for country television, but for the Hager twins as well. For nearly 25 years, the brothers had been regular fixtures in America's living rooms. Week after week, they delivered laughs, harmonies, and a brand of homespun charm that felt timeless. But once the cameras stopped rolling, so did the steady rhythm of their lives. Without the structure of the show, everything changed. The bookings slowed down, the fan mail thinned out, and the spotlight that once felt so warm began to flicker out. At first, Jim and John tried to keep things going. They made appearances at state fairs, charity events, and small country music festivals. They even recorded a gospel album together, something they'd always wanted to do. But the crowds weren't the same. The energy wasn't the same. And without the machine of Hee Haw behind them, they were no longer a guaranteed draw. The fame they once held was slipping through their fingers, and they felt it, deeply. For John, the decline was frustrating. He'd always wanted to branch out creatively, to act in films, to write songs that meant something. He tried to pitch ideas to networks, toyed with solo projects, and even explored opportunities in Christian television. But doors that once opened automatically now stayed shut. Jim took it even harder. Without the constant distraction of rehearsals, filming, and touring, he was left alone with thoughts he had kept buried for years. He began to isolate more and more. Friends say he rarely answered calls. He stopped showing up to social functions. The brightness in his eyes that fans had loved so much seemed to fade. And though he still performed with John on occasion, It was clear he was no longer truly present. Their twin dynamic, once effortless, now felt strained. They were still brothers, still best friends, but there was a quiet sadness between them that hadn't been there before. They rarely spoke about it publicly. The Hagers never liked to show cracks in the armor. But those closest to them saw it. The pain of irrelevance, the confusion of identity, the question that haunts so many performers. Who am I when no one's watching? They tried to find answers in small ways. Jim began attending spiritual retreats. John explored a deeper faith and spent time volunteering. But healing proved difficult. The past loomed large. The silence was loud. And for the first time in their lives, the Hager twins weren't sure what came next. Fame had given them everything. But now, it had quietly left them behind. And what they were about to face in the years ahead would test their bond more than ever before. For decades, the Hager twins projected an image of bachelor charm, always smiling, always flirtatious, always just out of reach. Their clean-cut looks and identical wardrobes made them the heartthrobs of Hee Haw, adored by fans across the country. But behind the stage presence, behind the synchronized grins, were two men whose love lives told a very different story. John Hager, the more outgoing of the two, had a string of high-profile relationships that never made headlines but stirred whispers in Music City. One long-rumored romance involved a well-known country singer, possibly even a fellow cast member on Hee Haw. Though John never confirmed it publicly, several insiders noted their closeness off-camera, the late-night phone calls, the carefully hidden weekends away. But as with many industry romances, it fizzled quietly, leaving behind more memories than regrets. He dated on and off for years, sometimes seriously, sometimes casually, but always cautiously. Friends say John never quite let his guard down. Not all the way. His heart, though big, had limits. He didn't chase commitment. He chased companionship. It was a subtle, constant search for connection that rarely lasted. Jim Hager, on the other hand, was different. He had fewer relationships, but felt them more deeply, and one in particular changed everything. In the late 1980s, Jim fell for a woman he met during a charity event in Tennessee. She wasn't famous, she wasn't part of the industry, but to Jim, she was everything. For the first time, those close to him saw something rare, a side of Jim that was open, relaxed, even joyful. He spoke about settling down, starting over, building a quieter life with her away from the pressures of television. But that dream would never come true. She passed away unexpectedly. Some say from illness, others suggest a car accident. The details were never fully shared. Jim stopped talking about it. But after her death, something in him closed for good. He never seriously dated again, never pursued marriage, never tried to replace what he lost. It was as if a part of his soul had been buried with her. And while the public continued to see Jim and John as fun-loving bachelors, the reality was far more fragile. Their romantic lives were marked not by passion and play, but by heartbreak and distance. They had learned, early on, that love was complicated when you lived in a spotlight built for two. The fame that made them stars also made real relationships nearly impossible. Always traveling, always performing, always being watched. So they leaned into the safety of each other. Brothers first. Always. It became their comfort, their fallback, their constant. But even that wasn't enough to fill the spaces left behind by love lost. As the years went on, the loneliness only deepened. The women came and went, but the ache stayed. And no camera, no applause, no Saturday night laughs could ever fill that void. What followed in the next chapter was not romance. It was reckoning. A slow, painful realization that time was running out. And for one brother, it would run out too soon. By the mid-2000s, the Hager Twins were a long way from the bright lights of Hee Haw. They still performed now and then, mostly at state fairs, small-town festivals, or nostalgia shows that catered to longtime fans. But time had taken its toll. Their matching blonde hair had faded to gray. The crowds had grown smaller, and the energy that once made them famous had begun to dim. Jim Hager, especially, was showing signs of wear. His once vibrant personality had been replaced by long silences, unpredictable moods, and a tiredness that went deeper than age. He was still quick with a joke when prompted, still professional when the curtain rose. But those closest to him saw the cracks. They spoke in whispers about his medications, about his isolation, about the depression he had quietly battled for years. Unlike John, who found small purpose in spiritual work and occasional songwriting, Jim seemed stuck. He no longer talked about the future. He barely mentioned the past. He simply existed. The brothers had always been close, but something had changed. John started speaking for both of them in interviews. Jim would nod, smile, maybe add a word or two. But his spark, the light that had made him half of one of the most beloved duos in country television, was fading fast. On May 1st, 2008, that spark went out completely. Jim Hager was found dead in his Nashville apartment. He was 66 years old. The cause? An apparent heart attack. But to those who knew him best, it wasn't just his heart that had given out. It was everything. The years of silent pain, the mounting health issues, the loneliness, the struggle of living in the shadow of who he used to be. John was devastated. They had been inseparable for over 6 decades, through fame, failure, laughter, and grief. Now, for the first time in his life, John Hager had to face the world alone. He didn't speak publicly in the days following Jim's death. He didn't make a statement. He didn't hold a press conference. He simply vanished. Friends said he was inconsolable, that he wandered their shared home in silence, unable to sleep in the same room they once rehearsed in. The guitars stayed where Jim left them. The stage costumes remained untouched. For John, it wasn't just grief. It was disorientation. He had lost more than a brother. He had lost his mirror, his balance, his second half. In interviews years earlier, John once joked that the hardest part about being a twin was, you never know who you'd be without the other guy. After Jim's death, he finally found out. And it was a truth he could barely survive. What followed wasn't a second act. It was a slow unraveling. Oh, life lived in quiet mourning. And it would end just as heartbreakingly as it began, with the sudden loss of a twin, and the question of whether one soul could ever truly exist without the other. After Jim Hager's sudden death in 2008, something inside John Hager simply stopped working. The world knew them as the Hager Twins, a packaged pair, 2 smiles, 2 voices, 2 matching sets of cowboy boots. But now, for the first time in 66 years, John had to live as one. Just John. And the weight of that was unbearable. Friends tried to reach out in the days following Jim's funeral, but John wouldn't answer his phone. The laughter he once shared so freely had vanished. His face grew gaunt, his voice quiet, his steps slower. He refused interviews, declined appearances. Offers came in, tributes, nostalgia specials, even a Hee Haw reunion. He turned them all down. When asked why, John would simply say, "I don't know how to be half of anything." In private, he kept everything the same. Jim's guitar remained in its stand, untouched. Their matching stage outfits still hung in the closet, perfectly pressed. Even Jim's side of the breakfast table was left set each morning, as if his brother might walk in at any moment and crack a joke about being late. But he never did. John had always been the stronger of the two, more outgoing, more resilient, more willing to take on the chaos of life. But without Jim, he had no reason to fight anymore. They had shared everything: birthdays, melodies, hotel rooms, heartbreaks. Even their silences were shared. Now John was facing a kind of quiet that felt unnatural, alien. He wandered between past and present. He played old tapes of their Hee Haw performances and would smile softly at Jim's timing, then stare blankly at the screen once it ended. When fans mailed him letters of support, he rarely responded. It wasn't rudeness, it was emptiness. One close friend later said, "John didn't die when Jim died, but something vital inside him did." The grief had settled into his bones. No drugs, no distractions, no new beginnings, just memory, just loss. And though he was never diagnosed with a terminal illness, John's health began to decline rapidly within months of Jim's passing. Doctors couldn't explain it. His vitals were stable, but he looked tired, worn, like a man who had already said his goodbye and was only waiting for the curtain to fall. On January 9, 2009, less than a year after Jim's death, John Hager died in his sleep at their shared Nashville home. He was 67 years old. No warning, no medical emergency, just gone. Some said it was a broken heart, others poetic timing. But those who knew the Hager twins best believed something simpler. John just couldn't live without his brother. In life, they had been mirror images. In death, they were reunited. And maybe, for two boys who had come into the world side by side, it was only right they leave it the same way, together. To most viewers, the Hager twins were just lovable clowns in country costumes, always laughing, always smiling. But there was a side of their story the cameras never captured. Off-set, Jim and John weren't just performers. They were artists, songwriters, men who desperately wanted to be taken seriously. Over the years, they pitched ideas to Hee Haw producers, original songs, sketches with more heart, even dramatic moments. But the show wanted laughs, not layers, so the twins kept performing the same bits, while their creative hopes quietly faded. Jim, especially, grew more withdrawn. Some noticed changes. His energy dipped, his timing slowed. He stopped pushing back. John, ever protective, began speaking for both of them in meetings. At home, their lives were simpler, but still centered around each other. They played music together, rehearsed just for fun, even if no stage was waiting. In one private clip, Jim forgets a chord and laughs, "Let's just fake it like we always do." John laughs too, a line meant as a joke, but heavy with truth. Because for all their fame, much of their life had been about keeping up appearances. The real story, the pressure, the disappointments, the emotional weight, was never part of the script. Until now. The story of Jim and John Hager isn't just about music or comedy. It isn't even just about fame. It's about what happens when two lives are so intertwined that the world only sees them as one. And maybe that's how they wanted it. For decades, the Hager twins entertained America with a synchronized act that felt effortless. Two voices, two hearts, one rhythm. But when the laughter faded, what was left was something far more human. They were not flawless stars. They were men who longed to be taken seriously, who craved authenticity in an industry built on illusion, who lived quietly through heartbreak, frustration, and the slow ache of fading relevance. And still, they never turned on each other. In the end, their greatest success wasn't a chart-topping single or a perfect punchline. It was loyalty. The kind of loyalty that doesn't waver, even when the spotlight disappears. The kind that survives loss. The kind that makes you hold on, even when you're the only one left. John once said that being a twin meant never having to explain yourself. Jim already knew. And maybe that's why, when Jim died, John followed just months later. Not out of illness, not out of despair, but out of love. The Hager twins came into this world side by side and left it almost the same way. Their story, often overlooked in country music history, is not just a footnote. It's a quiet masterpiece of brotherhood, loyalty, and unspoken strength. They were two men, living one life. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of legacy no spotlight could ever fully capture.